Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. My name is Elias. I'll be doing the consultation with you. Before we get into it, just so you know, we do record all of our consultations. I just like to let everybody know. It's in the form and everything, but it's just so you can have the information available so that you can look back at it.
Yep,
Okay. Um, why don't we just go ahead and jump right into it? And we're here to talk about Willow, correct?
correct.
Okay. Um,
Yep.
go ahead and let me know any of the issues that you're wanting to address with her, some goals that you're trying to attain with training, and anything else.
Yeah, so um I guess her biggest issue is reactivity, right?
Okay.
Pretty standard, but she's really has a tough time around guys.
Uh-huh.
If she did like I should say strangers.
Yeah.
Like once she's been around them enough, she kind of gets to know them and it's not, a concern.
Hmm.
I mean, still for me, I'll keep her muzzled until she's kind of, you know, relaxed and settled down, but that's probably her big thing is just she struggles a lot around strangers. I think where this came from too is I've dropped her off for boarding a couple times, and the last two times I've come to pick her up, I've had to actually come in and get her because she's either snapped at Jesse or I don't know exactly what happened.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I'm kind of familiar with her issues and everything, but
okay.
I'm just wanting to hear it from your perspective and everything like that as well.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the big one. I mean she's been through extensive training previously,
Hmm.
so I have a much better handle on, just her in general. Like I don't typically have any issues kind of walking her around. I live over in Old Town, so it is relatively busy. She'll get definitely amped up if she sees other dogs,
Okay.
especially if that other dog is within close proximity. Right across the street, not a big deal, but if we're walking past another dog on the sidewalk, um, that tends to get her a little
Mhm.
wound up. She doesn't typically do anything, like she'll start huffing and puffing and kind of her normal thing unless the other dog does something, right? The other dog, gets to the end of their leash and starts barking, then she kind of loses it too.
Yeah.
Which, I don't typically have a problem with because she wasn't doing anything first.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'll typically correct for it if she gets too kind of rambunctious, but
Hmm.
normally in the most part, it's once we're away from the dog, she'll be kind of spooked. She'll be looking behind her to see where that dog is, but it's nothing crazy.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know from a goal standpoint. I think it's just kind of continuing to build on, I think my old intent was to be able to take her, to more social places, whether that's like a dog friendly patio or, whatever the case is. I
Hmm.
don't think she's ever going to be that type of dog.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would want to have to kind of be on edge the whole time dealing with it. So I'm totally fine with that. But just getting her more comfortable, like being around other people, especially people that she might not know,
Okay.
is probably the biggest one.
Hmm.
So
Okay. And then as far as the obedience side of things, she responds well with the e-collar and everything, like your walks are fine and all of that.
well, kind of.
Okay.
So this was another thing that Elizabeth mentioned. She said you would probably know more. So she's e-collar trained. Um, she is super, super dramatic.
Okay.
Like if she's any sort of kind of wound up and she gets corrected, it sounds like she's dying.
Uh-huh.
So it's typically, I really have to play it by ear, especially in public.
Hmm.
Like I'm not going to have her kind of react like that if we're, standing on a corner with a bunch of people around because it's going to just be it's going to be a really awkward situation.
Yeah.
Um, so she did mention that um, that might come down to the type of e-collar. She said that some dogs have had that kind of response with some e-collars and switching brands
Hmm.
might help. I don't know how or why.
Okay.
But I mean, she's definitely e-collar trained. She knows her corrections, but I mean, she screams. Even if
Okay.
it's on like a 15, it is excessive.
And then
Um,
is this in every situation or is this only in certain situations?
it's typically more when she's wound up, right? The more she's wound up, the more of a reaction that
Yeah.
comes from a correction. I think a lot of it too is she anticipates it. So she obviously has a very close association with the word no and then a correction.
Uh-huh.
So when she hears no, and she'll immediately like pin her head back or like pin her ears back. She'll be right by my side. She'll be like spinning around, just waiting for that
Yeah.
correction. So I think that's almost part of it. Is she amplifies it so much more. Um,
Uh,
but it it's typically worse. I mean, she'll still make a noise, like if I correct her at home or something. I don't care as much because obviously there's no one else around.
mhm,
But it's not as dramatic. It's definitely more the more excited she is and the more aroused she is, the worse it is.
mhm.
So
Okay.
it just
Um,
depends.
when you're saying the word no, when does that come into play? Like, is it something she's doing that she shouldn't be, like the reactivity? You say no, and then you tap on the e-collar.
Yep, it's I mean, there's a couple different pieces of it. So if I'm on a walk, if she's kind of walking in front of me without paying attention, right? So I typically keep her in a heel. So my kind of criteria that I usually have with her is if she's any like her shoulder
Hmm.
is in line with my knee or behind me. That doesn't always work because she just tends, I don't know what it is, she just tends to always be near the front. Like even if I'm walking with someone, she wants to be kind of like the same position in the frontmost person. So we struggle a
Yeah.
lot with if someone's walking, one of my friends is walking a couple feet in front of me, she'll
Uh-huh.
want to pull forward and kind of walk next to that person.
Uh-huh.
But typically if it's just me, yeah, if she breaks a heel, if she's in a down and breaks the down, or any sort of like, I mean, any reactivity is really kind of the three pieces that I watch out for. Um,
Okay. And then when you're in heel and you're correcting her for kind of getting out of position, you just say the word no, tap on the e-collar, and she goes back in position, or is there anything else tied in with that?
it depends. It depends on how kind of the situation, but I'll sometimes try and guide her with the leash as well.
Okay.
Um, like this is more like so we'll have times where she'll be walking and she gets super hyper fixated on things, especially
Uh-huh.
other dogs. So she'll be walking, and if I notice that, I'll just stop, and she will just keep walking. She has no clue where I am. So in
Uh-huh.
that case, like she knows to eventually kind of get back to where she is, but that doesn't mean it sticks, right? If she's still focused on a thing, she might break her heel again
Uh-huh.
20 seconds later, right?
Uh,
So um, I I think she knows well enough to kind of know what's expected.
mhm.
But it's whenever there's some other thing going on that she is just too focused on that she kind of forgets what she's supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Is a big struggle.
Okie dokie. All right. So with the reactivity, just to mention some of the stuff we've seen here, as I'm sure you're already familiar with, if you spoke to Elizabeth or Jesse, um, yeah, we've noticed what you're saying. The growling sometimes, typically it's with Jesse, myself, or one of the other handlers. She gets growly. It's not everybody. So not sure if she just is more uncomfortable around us or something like that. And then same thing as you said, we will usually just try and correct her if she is wearing the e-collar in the moment and having that reactivity. If not, then it's we usually just try and put the muzzle on, and then as I'm sure when you talk with Jesse, you to come in and grab her and everything like that. So we're
Hmm.
familiar with seeing that from her. But at the same time, we've had her in play groups a few times where she's not necessarily playing, and she's able to walk around and kind of socialize, uh,
Hmm.
which is something that we would still consider as like a social activity for her
Sure.
because we can teach dogs to basically handle themselves in these social situations, but we can never make them like play. So
Mm.
even if you're not trying to get to that level of where you're thinking she's gonna play with everybody or something like that, which I know that you already are not expecting of her, um, we would still want to be at a certain level where it's like, okay, at the very least, I know that maybe you don't like these dogs or something, but you're not going to just go and lunge at them or go after them or something. Same
Sure.
with people, where she doesn't have to necessarily like everybody, but we just want the bare minimum of that. She's not going to do something negative towards a person.
Sure. Yeah, with dogs too, I probably should have mentioned, like, I personally have never had an issue with her with other dogs.
Mhm.
What I have, I mean, since I got her when she was 6 months.
Yeah.
So I don't, just from what I know about her, I don't think she was ever socialized as a puppy.
Uh-huh.
Like, I worked with a couple trainers back in Cleveland early on. She didn't know how to be around another dog. Like, she didn't know what to do.
Uh-huh.
She's much better now. Like, I've taken her around dogs. I'm very selective about those other dogs.
Mhm.
Um, but she's never had an issue. She's just very intense. She
Yeah.
doesn't really know how to play, so she'll like jump on dogs, and she doesn't pick up very well on social cues,
Uh-huh.
that I've noticed. But I typically don't, like, again, I don't take her to dog parks, things like that, because it's more of the what if that I don't want to deal with.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I'm totally fine if she's not a super social dog as is. Like, even with me,
Mhm.
she's not the kind of dog that's just going to come over and like sit at your feet and want to get pets. I
Mhm.
don't care about that. I just want to be comfortable if I have people here, if she's around other people. Like, I'm not going to have to constantly just monitor her 100% of the time to the point that I can't enjoy whatever else I'm doing. Right.
Okay, so moving into the e-collar stuff a little bit here. There could be a couple things happening with the e-collar where you're getting this more intense vocal response. And it really depends on the situation and where you're seeing this, just because one, it would make sense that when she's more amped up, you're going to get more of a vocalization from her, just because usually the vocalization is going to be coming from some type of frustration if she's not changing her behavior. So let's say she's staring at a dog and she is like starting to lunge at them, and you're tapping on the e-collar and she's vocalizing, but she's still lunging at the dog. That's what we would consider frustration, because the e-collar is not too strong. Otherwise, she would be doing something different, because then she would be considering the e-collar more important to her in that moment and wanting to do something to address that. But it's frustration because she's not getting to do the thing that she wants to do. But at the same time, we're putting more and more pressure on her. And we're never getting over that like hump of
Hmm.
making the e-collar the most important thing to her in that situation. So that's one thing that could be happening, where it's just her frustration building. So not necessarily on the collar side of things, but more on how we are addressing the situation. Another thing could be the e-collar, because I know that, um, as Elizabeth mentioned, certain brands can be a little more sharp for dogs, and it can depend on the contact points and everything. So the brand that we use here is Dogtra. It's
Hmm.
very similar to the one that you use right now. Is yours the e-collars technologies one?
Yep.
Okay. So their e-collars are pretty good, but we have noticed that sometimes their collars can be a little sharper depending on how sensitive the dog is. Um, I have both of them myself. I have a Dogtra one and an e-collars technology one, and I noticed that with my dog that the Dogtra one is usually smoother for him. But that being said, um, with that e-collar, if you're looking to stick with that, I'm sure there's different contact points you could try as well, like comfort pads and everything like that.
Yep.
Um, that I would recommend if you're not trying to switch collars. If you are trying to switch collars, then of course we would recommend Dogtra. For her, I will just say an e-collar recommendation, just for uh, in case you're curious about it. I
Hmm.
would recommend her the Dogtra 1900S Black Edition.
Okay.
Um, and after the consultation, you'll get a follow-up email with all this information as well. Just so that way there's you have that at your disposal.
Right.
Um, that collar is on the stronger end of the collars, but since she has this reactivity, we always want to make sure that we have enough of a power kind of range to be able to address it. Because
Right.
if we just do the thing where we are amping her up in the situation and we never address it, we're going to have a harder time next time, so on and so forth, because Now we're just getting her all the way to this frustrated state. And then she's thinking, well, I still didn't listen to the e-collar and I kind of fought through it. And then the e-collar stopped. So
Right.
next time I'm going to already jump to this level because I know this worked.
Right.
So that's another thing that could be happening. And then lastly, it is possible that the number could be too high, but at the same time, from what you've told me, where it's not necessarily the situation's been resolved fully, that it's sounding more to me like it's just frustration because she's
Yeah.
not really having a way to get that out. So a lot of dogs will vocalize. Uh,
Hmm.
any questions on anything I've said so far there?
No, I think that makes sense. The one piece that I don't know if you guys have seen, it depends really probably on if you're taking her on walks. I don't know how often that happens, but she also has a very high tendency to redirect,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
every single time she gets correct. So like when I'm walking, it's just part of like a habit now.
Mhm.
If I'm going to correct her, I typically kind of shift my body away as I'm correcting her because her mouth is going to fly. Like
Yeah.
she's never going to bite me.
Uh-huh.
She's like she's definitely like if I'm like playing with a toy, the moment her mouth touches a finger or something else, like she immediately stops.
Uh-huh.
So it's not doing it on purpose, but my previous trainer that she did a board and train with, the
Mhm.
first week she redirected and bit that trainer in the leg.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if that makes a difference at all, but that is something that typically I have to watch out for. And that's one of the reasons I don't typically let people walk her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Obviously that's something that we would want to limit, but at the same time, there are, especially if a dog is very like frustrated with the collar, in certain moments where there's like more stress involved, um, that is a kind of a normal response from some dogs. There's dogs who that's just their default response whenever, even if it's
mhm,
like not even a high number or they're not frustrated or they understand what's happening. That's just their first like kind of reaction.
yeah,
Um, that being said, we would kind of want to get her to a comfortable enough area to where maybe that reaction just isn't so strong. So like maybe she does like a head move, but not necessarily a whole kind of
right,
turn and grab type of thing. The only thing I would say for that, just to be able to, I guess, like always play it safe, would be like if you're on a walk, I would just throw like a long use like muzzle on her,
hmm,
just so that way you don't even have to worry about it really.
right,
Um, and that's more of a precaution, just so that way, regardless of what's happening, even if something more intense were to happen, like involving another dog, at least you still have that second level of kind of
right.
protection.
Yeah, and that's typically what I do. It depends on kind of obviously I play by ear like when I'm walking, where I'm walking, but yeah, if I'm walking on the weekend down like Wells, I'll
Yeah,
muzzle her just because there's so many people. And like walking's not a big deal. It's more if we get stopped at an intersection and then there's people like crowding around her, you can just I mean, she gets visibly stressed out. She's looking all over the place. She's not paying attention. So I'll
yeah.
typically muzzle her until we're in like an whether that's the park or a much kind of slower location. And then she's fine. Like she's completely fine off leash. I take her to the park all the time, run around, good recall.
Yeah,
I just don't trust her enough if there's other people and other dogs doing the same thing.
yeah.
So
Okay, well that's definitely good then. That's good practice with the muzzle. And then as far as the training itself, there's one thing that I think that we could probably clean up as far as how we're communicating with the e-collar with her. Um,
hmm,
so when we're saying commands, um, if we're addressing obedience, that makes sense, that works because we're not necessarily trying to uh like use the e-collar. It's more just reinforcing when you say like okay down and then they need to lay down or the
right,
e-collar kicking in. When we're addressing behavior though, most of the time, if we're trying to basically get rid of behaviors that we don't want, we would actually want to avoid using any words just because with those words, we're kind of giving her a warning and we're also kind of giving her um, a way to avoid the correction. And when we're addressing the behavior stuff, a good analogy between uh, the differences of obedience and behavior is that we would consider obedience stuff that you learn in school, like social studies, math, science, but we would consider behavior things that are more like morality based, like don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. So, in life, it's never somebody telling you like not to kill somebody. It's just assumed you shouldn't kill somebody.
Right.
So it's the same view here where we don't want to have to wait till a situation where Willow is going to bite a dog and then tell her, hey, don't bite that dog. We want it to be the default of you just shouldn't bite dogs. So with that, a lot of the behavior stuff we address without using any words. So for example, like the word no can be used if we're trying to control a behavior. Like for example, barking in the house is usually a behavior that people like to have a little more control over because they like the barking for a little bit of security. But when it becomes too much, they want to be able to say something to the dog to say like, hey, all right, for now you're done.
Right.
So with things like reactivity, we wouldn't be using any words because we just want to address the reactivity itself. And we want her to know that when she makes that decision to be reactive or to do this lunging or to get this tension with a dog, that's when the correction is going to happen. We're not going to tell you no, because then she's going to think, well, I can get away with all of this until I hear the word no. And at that point, she might already be too far into her reactive state to where she's too
Right.
So now we're having to go to a higher number on the e-collar because she's at like a 10 out of 10. She's ready to like explode. So we need to be at a more intense number to be able to bring her down. So addressing this as it's building and addressing it before we're saying the word and everything is going to help us work with her at a lower number so that way we don't see as much frustration and as bigger kind of explosive moments from her. And then it's also going to make it to where we're not going to have to catch her doing the reactivity stuff every single time moving on. It should just be, all right, we addressed it. She knows, like, no matter what we're doing, that the reactivity stuff cannot happen.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yes. And that's kind of like, I guess the way I've always thought about it too, and kind of the way, it's probably old training. Like typically if we're on a walk, her obedience, right? If we're looking at obedience versus behavior, she's in a come, right? So that's kind of like her, if she breaks that for whatever reason, that's kind of where I view like saying no and correction. Because typically, obviously, if she's being reactive, she's not following the initial command. So I could see both sides, but yes, it does make sense. I honestly prefer that way better, like your suggestion, because it's one of those, right? Then you're just saving that extra, whatever. You don't have to say no. I feel like it's much more instantaneous.
Yeah. And it's also just because there's really no scenario where we want to be seeing the reactivity. So just addressing it outright is going to make it easier for you and anybody else, because we're not going to have to be on constant alert of what Willow's doing. It's more like this is what, once we have that consistency of correcting it and she knows like, okay, when I do this, like this is going to happen, then it's more that she should just actively be making these decisions where we're not having to tell her to not make these decisions. And then even with the obedience, some of this can also carry over as far as how we like to use our words, like with our training. So even in the obedience stuff, usually we say the word for the command. So let's say you're going to go into heel. We would usually say like heel, and then all the rules of heel apply. It's similar to what you already said, how you would like to keep her right shoulder in line with your leg. We usually walk on the left side. Which side do you walk around?
She's on my left.
Okay. So yeah, right shoulder in line with your left leg. And then same as what you're doing with her. She shouldn't pass you. She shouldn't go behind you, anything like that. The difference with the way that we do it is if Willow was to make a mistake of going in front of you or going behind you or anything like that, we wouldn't say a word, just because for us, heel is like the important word that's happening. So once she's in heel, she's basically like clocked into work. And then all of these other things are just expected of her. So if she makes a mistake, we're not saying another word because then we're basically kind of resetting things for her. Whereas if we want the most reliable heel command, where we know once we say heel, that's it. She knows she's walking with me. She's not going in front. She's not going behind. Then we want to make that word heel very, very important to her. So
Right.
it's the same idea where like there's a when we're controlling a behavior with like the barking, for example, if we want to have Willow bark a little bit, but then be able to tell her stop, we only say the word once because then we're making that stop word or that no word very important to her. And then it's only consequence after that.
Right.
So same thing here. We're saying the word heel once, and then it's just consequences if she's breaking heel. So with this, we usually notice that it makes heel a lot stronger just because one, we're not having to again like catch her in the moment and tell her no and give her that warning. It's more that she knows, okay, I'm gonna stay at the position that I should be in because when I walk past, I know that the consequence is just gonna happen. So I'm not gonna walk past anymore. Rather than walking past, okay, I hear the word no, and then maybe she, like you said, she kind of knows that a correction is coming. So it's just creating a little bit more like tension between you guys in the moment. So with our kind of philosophy of teaching the obedience commands and like not repeating any words or anything after, we view it as the e-collar should never really feel like an argument. We're just keeping everything very black and white, and like this is the structure that Willow should be following. So the same thing would apply with any of the behavior stuff, anything of the obedience, where we're just keeping everything okay. If you're doing this, this is the rule set that we need from you. And then if you kind of go outside of that, it's consequence immediately. So that way, when we say heel, well, now we know that she's going to be on her best behavior because every time she walks ahead, no, that's going to be a correction. But we're not saying anything. So it's just kind of being ingrained into her that heel is all of this. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Okay. And that being said, because she does have this background with the e-collar and you have been working with her, a lot of this should be very easy fixes, easy cleanup with the obedience stuff, just because now we're just kind of basically being a little bit more strict on her, but she still has the idea of like what should and shouldn't be done.
Sure.
So that's a very good thing. Another thing with our heel, which I'm not sure if it's with your heel or not, but we do have an auto sit incorporated into our heel. Do you usually do that with yours?
I mean, she just kind of know, like, I don't enforce it as
Yeah.
long as she's kind of in my, I guess, bubble, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Typically, actually, if we're at like a crowded intersection or something, I've taught her middle, so she'll sit between my legs, and that's just more so there's not people like reaching out and kind of like trying to touch her. She's at my side, so I'll do that typically at busy intersections, but it's not really an expectation. It's more so is as long as she's kind of more so paying attention to me, not kind of wandering and sniffing around and doing her own thing. But she's not. I don't have an expectation of her to sit, at least right now.
So with our heel command, we do usually have an auto sit incorporated just to add that extra bit of structure where even when we're stopped and we're within the heel command, she's still basically, to use the work analogy, like clocked in to where, okay, like I have to, it's not necessarily like she has to be in the perfect sitting position, like next to you, it's just sitting at your side, kind of waiting to walk again, paying attention. And this is another kind of layer to help her not get so focused on everything that's around her. Because this entire time she's in heel, she has something to do and she has something that she needs to focus on. So if she's not focused on it, if she's not doing her job basically, well then a correction is going to happen because now maybe you're walking and she wasn't paying attention. So we need to correct for that, so on and so forth. And it allows us to help address a lot of the distracting stuff on the walks and the reactivity. Just because now we have basically made the heel command so important to her and so structured that ideally she shouldn't have like extra time and extra attention to worry about this dog that's over here or worry about this person that's over here because
Hmm.
she has basically all her work here in front of her that she needs to be doing while she's in heel.
Sure.
So usually adding that in, we can start to see a lot of progress with the reactivity on the walks. Again, just because we're not necessarily correcting everything specifically, it's more just reinforcing this heel command so strongly that this other stuff is just not as important to her.
Right.
And then as far as addressing the reactivity with the e-collar, a lot of it is going to be kind of managing her reactivity, but managing like at which level her kind of excitement or like energy is at. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when you're at this 10 out of 10 level, it makes sense that she's going to be vocalizing as you're tapping her, and maybe you're not being able to find the number that works for her because when they're at the 10 out of 10 level and the dog is reactive, that's going to happen like for any reactive dog, really, where they're just so in that intense moment that we would expect to see the vocalization, we would expect to see the frustration and everything. That being said, we can still work through it, but it's a lot harder to get over that wall when she's there than if
Hmm.
we can look for the signs of her building up and correct those building up moments. So that way, maybe we can always keep her at a 3, and then a 3 is much easier to correct now. So maybe we don't see as much vocalization just because she's in a more relaxed state overall. Um, so for example, let's say you're on a walk and you notice her start to stare at like a person or a dog. And let's say we already know Willow's kind of pattern of how she's going to go about it. Okay, she's staring. Okay, I see her hackles going up. Okay, now she's pulling, and then there she's barking and lunging. So what we would do is we would just all the way from the beginning, let's say we know that Willow can't handle staring at a dog for like 5 or 6 seconds. Past that, she starts to get really tense. So then once we see her look at this dog and we notice, okay, she's staring, okay, she's getting more tense, I'm going to correct right here. Just so that way we can cut it off before she can even commit to that thought. So
Hmm.
now, if we're consistent with that, what we would expect to see is, okay, she's staring at a dog, she's starting to get some tension, okay, she stopped. Because now she knows, well, every time I start to get this tension with this dog or this person, the e-collar is going to happen. So it doesn't matter to me. Like the correction of the e-collar is more important, so I don't care. And keeping her at that level is going to be able to let you address the reactivity much more consistently and without all this extra kind of vocalization and drama from her in the moment. Because she's going to handle a correction when she's just staring at a dog much easier than if she's already like lunging and pulling at a dog.
Right.
Um, does that all make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So a lot of that of addressing the reactivity is going to be looking for the signs of her building and cutting it off, and then cutting it off earlier and earlier if we have to. There's some dogs we've had where they will kind of turn on that reactivity so quick that, okay, we're only going to let you like, if we notice you staring at a dog or a person, we're only going to let you do that for 2 seconds now, just because we already know and we want to cut it off as early as we can. So through doing that, it's going to one, make the obedience a little bit easier too, just because she's going to be more in tune with whatever you're doing rather than like whatever's going on that's bothering her. And then two, it's going to help the reactivity in situations where we can structure it a little bit more. For example, if you're trying to get her comfortable around like a friend that she's normally not super comfortable around. Well, now that we've been addressing the reactivity in these other scenarios and we've kind of are teaching her how to have this like off switch, when we do it in this scenario, it's going to be a lot easier to address because now she's kind of has a template to work with. We're just
Right.
applying it to a different situation.
Hmm.
Any questions so far?
No, I think that all makes sense. One that popped up earlier. So, in kind of more around, if you're in a heel,
Yeah.
you don't give another verbal marker, right?
Um,
It's just a correction.
yeah.
So how does that work if you're in because again, this is more typical, or I guess this is more in my experience with her, and kind of just, living with her the last couple of years. Like, I'm very picky about when I correct her,
Yeah.
just due to the public perception of it,
Uh-huh.
right? So typically, if we're walking past a person and a dog, I
Yeah.
know she's going to get tense and frustrated and whatever else, and like I'll nip that quickly by
Uh-huh.
marking with a no, and then follow up with the correction, once we're past that dog or that person, whatever it is,
Mm.
more so for the public perception. Obviously, if we're just going to correct in the moment, that doesn't really exist. So how do you, I guess, does that matter? Do you actually even worry about the public perception of it? Like, how do you work through that?
Yeah. So ideally, we wouldn't even be seeing like such a large reaction from Willow if we're being very strict with the command, because our goal is to again create this very black and white command for her, so she knows when I do this, like this is going to happen. When I then this is what I'm supposed to do, because right now when Willow is having this gray area, and this goes for any dog, there's going to be more confusion, there's going to be more frustration, and you're not necessarily going to see clear cut progress. So, for example, in this situation, like if she's walking by a dog, you say no, and then afterwards correct her. To Willow, the correction is not necessarily making sense in that moment, because the correction of no happened when she was getting tense. So no is like technically like a correct time to correct. But when you're addressing her with the e-collar after that situation, that moment's kind of already passed. So that correction is not necessarily clear to her. It's not necessarily illustrating what was actually being corrected.
Right.
So, for example, if she's getting tense with a dog, we would want to address it right there with the e-collar, just so that way she knows, okay, I did this, and then e-collar happened. If I don't want e-collar to happen, I'm not going to do this. Whereas if we have that delay where you're saying no, and then even if she settles down a little bit, the word no to her is probably not as serious as the e-collar.
Hmm.
So to her, she's thinking like, okay, like I can stare at this dog and get tense. And then dad said no. So then I stop. And then maybe another dog comes along and she's like, okay, I'm going to stare at this dog and get tense. And then dad says no. And then I can stop. So she can kind of keep doing the same thing because no isn't really a big issue to her. If she's kind of receiving the e-collar correction there, well, now it's a bigger deal to her. So now she's going to be thinking, do I want to stare at this dog? I don't think so, because I know that the e-collar is going to happen. So,
Right.
and then as far as the public perception thing, obviously we would not want her having this big reaction, because I can understand how that would be very uncomfortable. And we don't necessarily expect everybody to just kind of say like, oh, whatever, I don't care, because we know that it could be uncomfortable. So with that, there is going to be a certain degree to where you're going to have to maybe push through a situation or two that you might be unprepared for in that scenario. I'm not saying that, it's never going to happen to where Will's going to have a moment you tap and then for some reason she has a strong reaction there. And it might be awkward for a moment, but ideally we are so clear and strict with the rules that the goal would be to be able to walk past this dog that she might be having issues with and not even have to tap or say anything. So the goal
Hmm.
would be that she already knows the rules. So she's like, okay, like I know the rules. I'm just going to continue on with my walk. And then we don't have to worry about tapping or anything like that, or we don't have to worry about saying anything because we've already instilled it to Willow that like, hey, we're doing stuff over here. You can't be doing that. And along the lines with that, usually what we recommend is that being strict and using the e-collar or early and often when you're going to be trying to address all this stuff is going to help you in the long run avoid having to use it all the time like that. So if we are really kind of like challenging Willow and pushing through all these difficult moments and keeping everything very, very strict to where it's like every single time she does this behavior, we're correcting, then down the line, we should be getting to that point where it's been so consistent that she's like, well, every time I look at this dog, it's going to happen. So I'm not going to do that anymore.
Right.
Usually when we see difficulties with dogs getting frustrated or some inconsistencies, it's because the training or the owner has not been consistent with it. So sometimes they'll let it slide and sometimes they won't. And now the dog is kind of becoming like a gambler where they're like, okay, I really don't like this dog. Is it worth it? The e-collar might not happen, so I'm going to give it a shot. So when whichever program you end up doing or however you're going about addressing Willow, being consistent right at the beginning and really working through all of those issues as strongly as you can is going to help you get to the point where you're not having to worry about the public perception because you've already instilled like what is expected of Willow. So maybe, you know, every so often you'll have like the one-off moment where you need to correct something, but even still, we're still doing our best to keep her at that lower level. So maybe the correction, she does like a little head turn, but is not vocal anymore or something like that to where we're seeing that progress.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be the goal, obviously. That would be what we would be working towards. And addressing the reactivity is something where again, it's just consistency is the biggest thing. As far as anything else involving the training or kind of like your goals with the training, was there any other questions or anything that you wanted to touch on there?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think a lot of it's just going to be more kind of keep, I guess, honing it, right? She's, believe me, when I got her, like she's night and day. Like I couldn't walk. I used to live downtown Cleveland. I couldn't take her outside. Like elevators were a no-no. So she's much better, but I think it's just kind of continuing to build. And I think we've hit a plateau, not necessarily due to her, but probably more so because I haven't been enforcing it as much. Like I kind of have my routes that I take and I can get her in and out. I don't really have it. I don't typically run into too many issues. It's just, I also tend to avoid certain situations because I know that's going to be right. So if it's a decision between walking up North Wells versus walking up a quieter street, I'll pick the quieter street, right? Just to make it easier on myself. So I think that is also a detriment because then you're not putting her in those situations that she can learn from. So I think it's just kind of working on that as well.
Yeah, and keep in mind that especially starting out, if you're not necessarily wanting to just right away put her in that busy like city situation, you can always like build up to it in quieter areas or setting up scenarios with your friends even to just like if one of them has a dog, maybe you just practice like walking past each other, seeing if she's gonna have a moment. And going to the park and like trying out different things with people, you can kind of slowly build her up to that degree where, okay, now we're going to walk down a busy street and do all of this stuff. It's more just about maintaining that consistency in whatever situation you're in, and that's going to keep everything sharp. So even if you haven't done like a structured walk where you're addressing everything in like a busy city street area, but you've been doing it in like the quieter areas, well, you're still keeping the structure going. So nothing's necessarily changing for her. It's just we're upping the challenge. So that's the way that I would think about it.
Okay.
As far as programs or anything like that, did you have a chance to look at them or was there a certain
I haven't actually.
Okay.
I haven't looked at them at all. So I wasn't sure if that was going to be I assume that's going to be in an email.
Yeah, it's not a problem if you haven't. I just know
Okay,
that usually sometimes people already have like a certain preference of what they would like to do.
sure.
Um, I
Yeah,
was,
I don't think, I mean, I guess I wouldn't prefer, I don't think she necessarily needs to go through another board and train. So
yeah,
I would think probably something more along the lines of like, one-on-ones or something similar,
yeah.
um, would probably be more appropriate.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't have a huge preference.
for her, since you're trying to mainly address the reactivity stuff and really kind of get a handle on the behavior side of things, I would 100% recommend doing in person
Okay,
rather than any daycare and train or board and train, just because with the behavior stuff, we always feel like it's best for the owners to be there handling their dog in the moment themselves, just so they get the most realistic experience. And then at the end of the day, when you're going to go home with Willow and practice throughout the week, you're going to have to be the one doing it. So we feel like with the behavior stuff, especially, the owner is needing a more hands-on approach. Uh,
sure.
so that is what I would recommend as far as type of program. And then for her, with the background that she has with e-collar, I think that you would be fine getting away with 3 week in person. If
Okay,
you're wanting to have like a little bit more control and have things spaced out a little more, you could do 6 weeks, and that would also be good. But I wouldn't do anything past 6 weeks because it would just be a waste of your money. And then also, I just feel like you probably wouldn't use all the extra classes.
sure.
So 3 weeks bare minimum, just because the way that breaks down is one class a week at like a time that works best for you, and they're hour classes. Uh, they'll most likely, with the weather being nice, be at Oz Park or another like kind of busy area park, just
Hmm.
a realistic experience. And two classes will be on heal and addressing the reactivity. One class will be on recall, but if you're not having any problems with recall, that can be substituted for something else involving the reactivity, or if you're wanting to touch up obedience stuff. And then the 6 week in person um, is the same idea as far as the first three classes. And then the other three could be split up between if there's stuff in home that you're having issues with her, then there can be a class in home as well. And anything extra that you want it to be uh, sharpened or to touch up on would be covered in the 6 week as well. So it's just kind of how much you're trying to get done with the training and what time frame you're looking at. But
Sure.
3 would hit your goals, 6 would definitely hit your goals, and then also a few extra classes if there's more things you wanted to work on.
Okay,
And then you don't have to decide any of this right now. I'm more just giving the range I would recommend to stay between.
sure.
Um, and what we'll do is we'll send you the information for both of those, along with all the pricing stuff and how that works and everything.
Okay,
That way you can see what's going to work best for you. And then most likely, you'll be doing this program with Jesse in person. I'll recommend you to him just because he has handled her a little bit more in the moments that she's had here. And then she um, seems to be like very intense with him. So it could also help
right.
training to be able to work with this person that maybe she's not a big fan of. So um, as far as the e-collar, okay, I already said that, the 1900S Black Edition, that'll also be included in the email just so that way you can familiarize yourself with it in case you do end up wanting to switch. And then did you have any other questions regarding the programs or the e-collar or anything like that?
Nope, I assume it's going to be in the email. I was
Yeah,
just poking around on the website. I couldn't find a whole lot about kind of the different services and programs offered, but
yeah. I would
if
go
it's in the email,
to,
then it's fine.
yeah, it'll be in the email, but if you're wanting to look on the website, it should be under like behavior training or behavior um
Okay,
I believe it's behavior. I think it's behavior training. I'm
Okay.
not exactly sure, but either way, we'll go ahead and throw all the relevant information in the email as well, just so that way you can have it both places.
Sure.
And then, did you have anything else before we go ahead and wrap up the consultation here, or?
I don't think so. Nothing sticking out. I think I asked as I went.
Yeah, if anything comes up involving the training, feel free to respond to the email that you'll be getting. Even though you'll be talking to Jesse's assistant, she can relay myself or Jesse any relevant information that is regarding training, and we can go ahead and answer your questions as they come up. And then anything that is involving setting up the program, you'll go ahead and go through her, and she'll be able to help you with scheduling, payment, changing anything like that.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. So just keep an eye out for that email. It should be sent to you today, and then I look forward to seeing how Willow does and everything.
Perfect. Thank you for the time.
All right, no problem. Have a nice day.
You too. Enjoy the weekend.